G'day humans, Chris Stead here. Today I'm comparing the Sony Bravia 9 with the LG G4 OLED TV, the two flagship models in the 2024 range from these respective manufacturers. Which one is right for you? Let's find out. Now across the course of this video I'm going to show you a fair bit of side-by-side footage. Right now I have some content running from my own YouTube channel. This is 4K content out of the Maldives, just because I know I can't get copyright pinged for it because I own it. But what we have here is we have the 75-inch Sony Bravia 9 and we have the 55-inch LG G4. Now these were the two models that were supplied to me for review. There will be separate reviews of both of these TVs going live on the channel. We'll go really in depth on them individually, but in this particular video it's just about comparing the differences between these two particular models. Now they are using quite different tech. So the Sony Bravia 9 is a mini LED QLED panel, and Sony's kind of focused with this iteration on brightness, on color, and on the audio experience you're getting out of this. Whereas over here on the LG G4, we've got a WOLED, like white OLED panel. It's part of the OLED Evo, they're calling it. So it's that kind of next iteration from what we saw in the G3. And their focus is really on contrast ratio, the AI upscaling and features, and also on the gaming side of things. So, which one is right for you? We've got to jump in and find out. Now, first off, let's have a talk about the prices of the two models here in Australia anyway, because the OLED panel, as you might suspect, is the more expensive option. So retail-wise, the Sony, and I'm just going to do a comparison based on the same size. So this is 75-inch Sony is going to set you back $699 recommended retail price, whereas the 77-inch variant of this one, the LG G4, is going to set you back $7,999 here. Now, just before I just shot this video, I jumped online, had a look around, see what they're actually going for in reality, and it looks like you can get the Sony for around $599, so about $1,000 less than that recommended retail price, whereas the G4 looks like you can get it for about $6,500 was the cheapest I saw it. So they're a little bit closer in price potentially than it originally seems. It's worth noting that overseas you can get a 65-inch variant of this, a 75-inch and an 85-inch. Here in Australia, just the 75 and the 85, no 65 here in Australia, at least not as of October 2024. The LG model, on the other hand, however, has a much bigger range of variants. This is the 55, as I mentioned. There's a 65, I believe. Sorry if I get these slightly wrong. There's a 65, a 77, an 83, and a 98, I think, something in the 90s as well. So a much bigger variety of panels you can choose from in the G4 range. All right, so let's get into a bit of side-by-side action. I just want to talk through a couple of the key specification differences between them. So even though these are the flagship models in the Sony and LG TV ranges for 2024, they're actually not apples for apples comparison, because the Sony Bravia 9 is using that mini LED QLED panel, as I mentioned, whereas the LG G4 is using a WOLED panel, but with MLA as well. So that's microscopic lens array, which basically means it's in the billions of little lenses across the top of the panel, like a film over that front of that OLED panel to help concentrate the light and direct it forward and basically give you a better experience. So two top of the range panels, absolutely, but using different tech, and that's probably going to play into the way that you want, or which one model you're going to choose. Now, in terms of the resolution, they're both 4K, they're both offering 120 Hertz. The processor, well, the processor for the Sony is the XR processor. The processor for the LG is the A11 AI processor, and it's worth mentioning that in the presentations for both these TVs that I got from the manufacturers, Sony was very light on mentioning AI at all, even though it uses it in places like for voice zoom, which is a great feature that basically enhances the dialogue in a movie or a TV show. In the LG presentation, they were really on about the AI. The AI was involved in everything related to the G4 panel. So that's just an interesting variance between the two. And I mentioned at the top, the LG is a lot more focused on the AI side of things, at least in the way that they describe it. Now, in terms of peak brightness, the LG G4 is going to give you about 2,300 nits, so super bright, like super bright. But the Sony Bravia 9 is going to get up to 2,800 nits, so even brighter again. Like I said, it's their brightest 4K panel ever. And they're actually trying to match the brightness and the color that they get from their cinematic technology that they use. Say, for example, at Sony Pictures to film the actual movies. They're trying to get as close to the actual movie filming experience with a viewing experience in your house. Now, response times is very, very interesting, and I'm going to talk about gaming a bit in this comparison. But the response time on the Sony Bravia 9 is 3.2 milliseconds. And on the LG G4, it's 0.2 milliseconds, so it's much faster response time on the OLED panel from LG, which isn't a surprise, but it does play into things like gaming and also viewing, which involves a lot of motion, for example, sport. Now, in terms of the dimming experience across the two, obviously the OLED it's got control over those pixels. In fact, there's 8 million different pixel processors in the LG G4, so they can all be processed independently of each other. And that allows you to get that incredibly amazing contrast ratio and incredibly deep blacks and none of that blooming and light bleed across from, you know, the next door pixel. Whereas that's kind of the negative of the LCD panels, the QLED panels. However, having said that, what they've done in the Sony Bravia 9 is they've got this new processing system. I believe they call it, to me, I don't know if it's internal name, but Sesame Seed processors. But basically, it's greatly increased the amount of dimming zones into the thousands. So it's still got pretty awesome control of its light. So not quite as good as an OLED panel, but definitely far more advanced than what we saw, you know, back in the day from LCD. Now, in terms of the audio, the Sony Bravia 9 has a bit of an edge here. It's got a 70-watt system. It's got a 2.2.2 Dolby Atmos sound system in it. And it does a pretty good job too. One of the better sounding TVs I've ever heard. Having said that, it's still nothing compared to putting a soundbar with it. But the audio on the LG G4 is a 60 watt, so slightly less oomph, 4.2 system. Again, Dolby Atmos enabled. Not quite as good, and definitely you notice the audio isn't quite as good on the G4. HDR is interesting because they've both got Dolby Vision and they've both got HDR10, but they both don't have HDR10 Plus. So they're both missing that. On the gaming side of things, again, they're pretty similar. Both got auto low latency mode, both got source-based tone mapping, both got VRR. Although I will say that the VRR on the LG G4 has a broader range. It can you know, roam between 40 and 144 hertz, whereas on the Sony it's 48 to 120 hertz. So there's a bit more range there with the G4, and G4 also advertises FreeSync and G-Sync support as well. Now, speaking of gaming, ports a huge thing. LG definitely has the nod here. It's got 4 2.1 HDMI ports, and as I go into a little bit with the design as well, they're easier to access. Whereas the Sony is still using what I think is super outdated, I guess, motherboard at the back there. It's got just the 2.1 HDMI ports, one of which of course is the EARC, so it gets consumed by a soundbar, leaving you with basically just one to run your consoles. It does have 2.0 HDMI, so there's 4 in total, but only 2 are that next gen 2.1. On the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth front, we've got Wi-Fi 6, so in the Sony, and Wi-Fi 6E in the LG, so slightly better in the G4, more modern, but it's reversed with Bluetooth. On the Sony, Bluetooth version 5.2, whereas on the LG, Bluetooth version 5.1. Both of those are a bit of a letdown. It should be 5.4 in this day and age, in my opinion. Obviously, the operating system side of things, Sony is using the Google TV 12 operating system, and LG uses its own WebOS 2024 edition. The operating systems, I find the Sony personally a little bit more easier to use. It's a little bit more responsive, it's a little bit more straightforward. It's got a bit more depth because it's plugging into that grander Google TV experience. But WebOS is definitely no mug. It's still pretty good. And whilst Sony hasn't advertised how many years of support it's going to provide for its TV, LG has come out and said that they're going to provide at least 5 years of support on the WebOS 24 on the G4. So for at least for the next 5 years, it's going to get updated with the operating system as it evolves. And finally, with the weights, another noticeable difference between the two. The Sony, the mini LED model, is the heavier of the two. It's 42.3 kilograms, whereas it's 37.4 kilograms for the G4 OLED. That is, of course, without the stand. Now, when we compare the design of the two panels, I definitely think that the LG wins out here. The Sony, while definitely not an ugly machine, it's a bit fatter. It doesn't quite feel as premium. It feels a little bit more plasticky. The bezel's a bit thicker as well, and you've also got not as great access to the ports, because all the ports are on this side of the TV here, and when you're getting these bigger TVs, they're getting bigger and bigger, and all your kind of devices are down here further. It's getting harder and harder to reach these ports in an elegant fashion. So I do think that that's something that lets down the Sony in this regard, because the LG, on the other hand, has two ports facing down, 2 ports facing to the side, so you can access from the side, you can access from underneath. It gives you a little bit more flexibility in use. It's got a more elegant cable managing solution behind it, where it kind of funnels the cables down to the legs, kind of gets them out of the way, or even if it's wall mounted, it kind of gets it out of the way. It's got a more premium feel to it. It's got like a more of a metal feel. It's a lot thinner. So the profile side of it's a lot more elegant as well. And the bezel is much more minor as well. It's also worth mentioning that in the packaging for the LG, it actually came with a full metal bracket for wall mounting, actually with the TV. So that comes out of the box, where the Sony had to go buy a wall mount to then attach the TV to the wall. So that's a couple of variances on the design side of things. Now with the remotes, I tend to go the other way. So I've got the 2 remotes here. So I actually really like the LG remote, because it's got the wand capability. So you can actually just move, you can probably see that little magnifying glass there. So you can actually just kind of do everything by motion controls a lot easier, but it's definitely the bulkier of the two. It's a much more bulky device, and it's a bit more cumbersome to use. It's a bit slower. It uses traditional batteries as well. Whereas the Sony remote, it's much more thinner. It fits much more nicer in your hands. It's much more responsive to use. It can be charged by USB-C. It's backlit, so it's really easy to use at night. And it's also got Find My Remote, so you can just actually say Find My Remote and it will start beeping and locate where your remote is, which is something that I need because I've got kids and the remote gets lost a lot. So yeah, in terms of the design of the remotes and the way that the remote's functionality, definitely giving the nod to Sony on that one. But I certainly don't mind the LG remote. If it had that one functionality within this size and shape, I'd be stoked. All right, now in terms of the performance of the two TVs, this thing obviously gets really interesting. There's definitely pros and cons to both. Now, I should iterate that I've got these both set on Vivid setting and with kind of the out-of-the-box factory settings. I haven't stuffed around with the brightness or anything like that. I just kind of wanted to try and get as close as possible to a similar setting between the two. So they're both just set to Vivid and they're both just out-of-the-box, you know, without any sort of kind of refinement or tweaking on my part. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of stuff with AI with the LG, so that's they do a lot with AI upscaling, a lot with AI color tweaking and contrast, sharpness, that kind of things. Look, they're both really snappy, great screens. They're both going to provide you with a really lovely viewing experience. What I've found is there's definitely the OLED, the G4 has more crispness and definitely has deeper contrast. There's no doubt about it, which is what you'd expect. But I do find that there's a bit more of well, it's definitely brighter, the Sony, and it's also got a bit more of a warmth to the color. The color is just a bit more natural, if that makes sense. So yeah, interesting little differences between the two in that regard. Obviously, if you've got a PlayStation 5, that really works quite well with the Sony. There's lots of integrated features and things like that. I do find that when you're tweaking, you're in the settings and you're mucking around with the settings, that the Sony does provide a little bit more subtleness in the way that when you kind of start playing around, start trying to find that perfect sweet spot, it does, yeah, you just got a little bit more control, it feels, with the Sony and the UI and the menu system and so forth. Just, yeah, a little bit more, yeah, power there. But yeah, absolutely the crispness of the G4 can't be argued with. Viewing angles, you know, I'm standing here now off to the side. I can definitely see the G4 a lot clearer than I can see this. I can see them both pretty well, but the G4 is just that, the sharpness, that crispness. It just works a lot better. Reflective wise as well, the G4 is a lot less reflective. And this one, when I was kind of like trying to get some lights and just trying to shine them both on both TVs at once, it was more muted on the G4 and it was sharper and more detailed here on the Sony Bravia 9 with the reflection. People have also complained about a rainbow effect with reflections on the Sony Bravia 9. If you get the light, this happens to just be in a perfect angle. I have not encountered that. So I can't comment on that, but people have mentioned that. With an OLED, obviously there is a risk of burn-in. You always read about the risks, people always tell you about the risks. I've only ever really seen it in like hotels where people just leave the menu of the hotel up for the entire day. I've never actually come across it in the panels that I've had, but it is a bit of a risk with the OLEDs that you need to take into account. As mentioned before, the audio experience out of the box is better on the Sony, but having said that, you pair them with a soundbar. If you're going to spend this much on an awesome TV, spend a bit more and get an awesome soundbar as well. I've got plenty of soundbar reviews up on the channel if you want to check them out. Obviously, they have their own in-house soundbars. Sony has a soundbar. I just did a review of the Sony Bravia 8, Theater Bar 8 with this, and it's got center sync and all the features that kind of link this TV, your PlayStation console, and the soundbar together. LG also has their variants of that. So, and when I was doing the specs before, there was a heap of other specifications which are more or less the same, or just worded differently between the two, which I didn't bother talking you through at the time. Now, with the gaming side of things, look, they both look great. Obviously, there's a bit of extra refinement with the Sony. It's got the kind of, it's able to acknowledge the PlayStation 5's existence and knows exactly how to maximize PlayStation 5 signal and what's coming through and how to utilize it the best. In fact, it's got a couple of presets like that, the Sony, like for Amazon and Netflix and a few things, it'll auto-calibrate for you. But then the response time isn't as great. You don't have as many 2.1 ports as well. And there's a bit more flexibility on the variable refresh rate with the G4. So with the gaming side of things, unless you've actually got a PlayStation 5, the G4 is probably actually the better panel for gaming. All right, guys, well, there you have it. That's my comparison of the Sony Bravia 9 and the LG G4, two great panels. Look, if you're looking for, if you own a PlayStation 5, if you're looking for the better color experience, or if you've got a particularly bright room that you're in and you really want to combat that with, like, you know, some serious peak brightness, then have a look at the Sony. If you're looking for the broader gaming experience, if you're looking for just those super deep blacks, that awesome contrast ratio, and a more elegant and sexy design, then you might want to look at the LG G4. Obviously, mini LED, OLED, the two very, very different experiences on a technical level, but as you can see, they both look fantastic all the same. All right, that's my comparison. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Chris Stead. Make sure to check out my other videos, and until next time, I'll check you later. You!